Xi Jinping makes no secret of it. China wants to incorporate Taiwan, if necessary, by force. Beijing has already given a specific deadline for this. A war would have massive consequences for the whole world. The struggle for global supremacy has long since begun, unnoticed by the majority of the population. It's abstract and it's overshadowed by the corona or climate crisis, but it's still of immense importance. The struggle between China and the US is about more than economic strength or military power. In this conflict, it will be decided which ideology will dominate the world in the future and whether democratic values will become significantly less important. The prevailing belief in the Communist Party is that the system of the People's Republic, with a mixture of authoritarian politics and economic growth, is superior to all other systems. That is why Beijing is promoting an alternative to the democracies of the West in the world. According to Beijing's will, China's roots should be exported first to neighboring countries, then to the whole world. First of all, the Chinese government's crosshairs are those territories which, according to their understanding, belong to the national territory of the People's Republic anyway. In the struggle for global supremacy, compromises such as one country, two systems on the Hong Kong issue are a thing of the past. Rather, it is now true there's only one China, one political system under the complete control of the Communist Party. Especially the small island of Taiwan, also known as the Republic of China, is increasingly feeling China's aggressive claims to power. President Xi threatens the people in the breakaway province with a war at regular intervals. For reunification, he has already given a specific deadline. The year 2049, the People's Republic will then be 100 years old. It is by no means an empty threat, on the contrary. There appears to be no alternatives to the incorporation of Taiwan for the Communist Party because it placed this question at the center of the nationalist narrative in China. The only question is how much China would like to risk for this, because an attack on Taiwan could, in the worst case, lead to a global war. In order to understand the complexity of the Taiwan conflict, it is necessary to take a look at history. The conflict between China and Taiwan is a legacy of the 22-year civil war that raged in China until 1949. The communists under Mao Zedong ultimately triumphed against the nationalists of the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek. The Kuomintang fled to Taiwan. Chiang Kai-shek established a military dictatorship there and proclaimed his claim to rule over the entire Chinese empire from Taiwan until his death in 1975. The Western democracies sided with Chiang Kai-shek in the Cold War, despite the fact that he violently suppressed the people of Taiwan, but he was, after all, opponent of communism. In the decades that followed, a tug-of-war developed between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek over the only legitimate China. The people of Taiwan in particular suffered from this, and 1971 was a turning point for them. The Communist People's Republic was accepted into the United Nations at that time, and Taiwan declined an offer in protest. In the power struggle between nationalists and communists, only one China could still sit at the international negotiating table. The One China policy emerged, which continues to shape international diplomacy and foreign policy in the People's Republic to this day. Since then, Taiwan has only been recognized as a country by 15 smaller states. For the UN institutions, it is part of China, although Taiwan is now a democracy. This always leads to problems. In the corona pandemic, for example, the World Health Organization always calculated the number of infections in Taiwan to those of the People's Republic in the statistics. Since many states, including the USA and many European countries, established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic in the 1970s, these states also broke off relations with Taiwan. The island was largely isolated internationally. Despite the major obstacles, Taiwan stuck to a path that removed the small country of 23 million people from the People's Republic. There have been free elections since 1992. A modern democracy and market economy established itself. Taiwanese society, however, is divided. It is above all older generations who would like the majority of them to be reunited with China. For them, the hope of economic prosperity is greater, than the value of a democracy with freedom of expression. However, over 60% of the population see it differently. Young people in particular are actively defending the country and their freedom against China. This was last seen in 2014 when the Sunflower Movement, made up of many students, prevented a law that would have given China control of the Taiwanese economy. The movement succeeded and resulted in a change of power. Since 2016, Taiwan has been ruled by the DPP and President Tsai Ing-wen, who want to slowly and peacefully detach the country from China. However, China is sticking to its claim to control the island. The threat is an everyday occurrence in Taiwan. Chinese warplanes and ships are constantly testing the Taiwanese defense readiness. Beijing lets its army hold maneuvers to train an invasion or, for example, the storming of the presidential palace in Taipei. The Taiwanese infrastructure is constantly being attacked by Chinese hackers, and the rhetoric from Beijing is also clear. Xi Jinping said, "The clarification of the Taiwan question and the complete reunification with the motherland are the irrefutable historical tasks of the party and the common goal of all Chinese. Now everyone is to work together to crush any aspirations for Taiwan's independence. We do not rule out the use of force." Given the buildup and concentration of Chinese troops, the Pentagon in the USA expects an attack within this decade. This was reported by the Admiral in Command of the US Indo-Pacific Fleet, Philip Davidson, in Congress in March. But what are the arguments in favor of a Chinese invasion? And what about it? Let's see. What are 6 reasons for an invasion? First is nationalism. While Mao Zedong fought for the supremacy of communism and the presidents after him often for economic prosperity, Xi is concerned with national prestige. China should become a superpower. One great country, one people, one religion. The Taiwan question is of great national importance for the current Communist Party. And second, no democracy laboratory on the doorstep. For the Chinese government, Taiwan is an intolerable countermodel to its ideology. Taiwan shows that a different political system and democracy are possible in a Chinese population. Third, military imbalance. Taiwan cannot do much militarily to oppose the People's Republic. In the early 1990s, arms spending in both countries was still in a similar range, but China built up massive armaments after the turn of the millennium. Taiwan is being equipped with US military equipment, but the Chinese army has also been massively modernized. The only question in a conflict is how long Taiwan can fight back. And 4, Beijing is running out of time. Younger generations in particular have got used to democracy and freedom of expression in Taiwan. The longer the People's Republic waits to attack, the less support it will get from the Taiwanese population. 5. Hope for little international resistance. China creates economic dependencies all over the world. In Europe too, there are many countries, for example Portugal, Greece or Hungary, that are so dependent on Chinese investments that they no longer condemn the People's Republic on human rights issues. Beijing hopes that these countries will not want to weaken their own economies because of small Taiwan. In Hong Kong, the resistance was also manageable. And 6, no economic submission. The strategy that Beijing usually uses to secure control over other states is to invest heavily in the economy. That didn't work in Taiwan. But there are also reasons that speak against a war. First, China risks a global conflict. In the event of an attack, Beijing must expect the US to act as the protective power of Taiwan and defend the island. They would be facing an opponent who is militarily far superior to the People's Republic. In the United States, the protection of Taiwan is enshrined in law. While the Chinese government has never really been able to assess Donald Trump, one is actually certain that US President Joe Biden would keep the promise of protection. If the United States intervenes, NATO could also be drawn into the conflict. And second, war is expensive. Strategically, invading Taiwan is not easy, despite its military superiority. The island is rocky, experts see only 11 locations where Chinese troops could land. The Pentagon has worked out a strategy with Taiwan that would result in guerrilla warfare. Land and sea mines, urban warfare, a network of tunnels, the use of drones. A war could cost China many resources and human lives, although I know human lives are not that. Third, invasion would have to be quick. The People's Republic would have to make sure that Taiwan is taken before the Americans arrive. Many military experts think this is not realistic. And fourth, economic damage. The People's Republic is dependent on economic growth, and that is primarily based on exports. War always harms the economy, especially since Beijing should expect new sanctions. And 5, China is isolated. It's difficult to become a superpower without having allies. With an aggressive expansion policy, China is creating more and more distrust. Relations with neighboring countries are already often bad. Even between China and Russia, there's only an alliance of convenience. In many countries, an invasion of Taiwan would fuel fears of a Chinese attack. And 6, an inexperienced army. Troop strength and equipment are one thing, but the Chinese army has little experience in war and crisis areas. That in turn could also be a reason for an invasion, because Beijing will want to test its own repartee at some point. Ultimately, the risk of war is difficult to assess. China under Xi is too unpredictable for that. Much will depend on how much self-confidence the Chinese leadership has in its own strengths. In terms of rhetoric, however, the Chinese president continues to run into a dead end. Too often, if necessary, forcible reunification is declared to be the crucial issue, so that backtracking would only be possible with a great loss of face. In addition, the Chinese leadership could use a war to divert attention from domestic political problems. China has this in common with other autocracies. A crucial question will be how expensive a war would be for Beijing. The international community also plays a role in this. If the defense of the democratic idea is taken seriously, many EU states and also the USA could free Taiwan from diplomatic isolation, because the small country embodies the ideal of political participation of the population, human rights, and freedom of expression. Lithuania took a bold step last week. Taiwan was allowed to open a diplomatic mission there. The EU member is thus on a course of confrontation with China. Beijing described the announcement as a farce and recalled the One China principle. The confrontation with China on an ideological level seems inevitable for the democratic West. Governments in Europe and North America must decide how many economic concessions they are willing to make in this conflict, not only in defense of Taiwan, but also in the struggle for a democratic world order. The Taiwan issue is just a magnifying glass of a much larger battle. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.